Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. Our guest today is going to be a popular favorite, I can tell you right now, because he's going to answer a question that so many of our listeners have, which is, how do I scale a business that goes beyond just me? So many entrepreneurs, seven-figure entrepreneurs particularly, and as they get into eight figures, there's still this pain point where the company becomes too dependent on either any one person or the CEO themselves. And so we're going to get beyond that. So Gray Mackenzie is here with me. He's one of the founders over at Zen Pilot. They're an expert when it comes to systems, processes. I am super, super excited to talk with Gray. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. I'm excited to be here.
While we were waiting and I was in this holding room, I see this quote for Edward Deming, who is one of the 9 world turning points throughout world history for his ability to systematize and create processes around these different organizations. So, Deming, I was not only mentored under one of Deming's proteges, one of my clients was one of the co-founders of the Deming Institute of Technology, I believe it was. And I've been a huge, huge, huge Deming fan. I don't know anybody that's added more billions of dollars to process improvement than Deming. How has Deming influenced your life?
Growing up, never heard of the guy. And had a college professor named Bruce Kettler. And I took a lean manufacturing course. I took a couple of different lean courses in college, mostly because I thought this professor was cool. A big Deming fanboy. And I thought it was kind of weird. I was like, okay, efficiency, that's not the sexiest thing in the world. And it turns out it actually is super interesting and really fun. That's a passion of mine. But Deming's, a couple of quotes that always stick out to me are essentially that whatever the results that you're getting are the result of the systems that you've designed, which is, hey, you've got a chaotic system designed and you're getting chaos as the outcome. That's what comes from it. And if you've got a system to produce clarity, clarity is the outcome that comes from it. That gives us a lot of ownership over the results, which I think for me was the first big influence from Deming even in college. Was, hey, what I'm getting is an outcome in whatever area of life. Those outcomes are derived from the system that I've got around it.
Sure.
It kind of started the whole systems thinking or intentional systems thinking approach in my life and ultimately led to this business.
One of my favorite quotes, and of course I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but it's along the lines of, if you can't define what you do as a process, and you don't have real business. And what happens is you get a lot of variation. Variation, to lean on more Deming influence, variation is the enemy of excellence. So it's in that variation that causes issues and problems.
Yeah. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, then you don't know what you're doing. But we see that all the time where, like, hey, we redefine a new standard and it's great in a lot of positive ways. Marketing has become more human. There's more of an emphasis on, hey, how can we delight customers and create repeat customers? And I think there's areas where that makes a ton of sense to do and ways to do it. But when you take something that should be a standard outcome and you change that and do that differently just one time instead of on an ongoing basis, that creates a new expectation for us. We just had this conversation. We haven't talked at all, and we may or may not even mention the word ClickUp here, but we work really closely with a project management platform called ClickUp.
I mean, that's probably the most popular, or right up there is the most popular, right?
So we run our process when we're taking an agency or any team and we're helping them get onboarded into the tool is we'll do a systems design sprint first. Often if they're coming into ClickUp new before they buy ClickUp. And sometimes we're working a deal and ClickUp sales teams are working a deal at the same time. And if that's happening and we're going to take somebody through the blueprint, we say, hey, hold off on your ClickUp sales conversation right now, and we'll design what you actually need. And then at the end of that, it's just gonna be obvious to everyone what plan you should buy and how many seats you should buy and all the buying process. Well, ClickUp pushes pretty hard if they know that we're in that process to be like, I've got a quota to hit right now. I want to get in and do it. And I was just having this conversation internally this week. We introduced ClickUp into the sales process early to try and help a sales rep at ClickUp, but before the client was really ready to, it was interruptive to our process. They wound up signing on, they get a good deal with ClickUp. Like, everything was fine from the client perspective, super chaotic from our perspective in our process. And the sales rep was thrilled. And internally, it's like, hey, we made a new fan of an account executive at ClickUp. We helped him out. He actually hit his quota because of this deal and whatever else. And my point to the team was like, that's now the new standard, though. Now, every time that's greatly appreciated today, but the next time there's a quota to be hit and we've got a deal that's in the way, they expect the same exact thing every time. Yeah. So when it's taking what should be a normal process and you interrupt it, you're creating a new standard, and that's going to be very disruptive down the road.
we've seen this a lot over the last few years, especially the last couple of years, where there's been a high turnover of employees. And so you may have one employee doing one thing for a series of clients, and then when there's turnover to another employee, the client gets a totally different experience. That is very, very disruptive, and they start to wonder, do you guys have your stuff together? And how many times have you walked into an organization and you realize that all the employees in the organization, everything that they're doing is managed just between their ears? And then the pain of onboarding those employees, or new employees, when you're trying to build a company, but the whole company is based on hands-on experience, post-it notes, and things between their ears.
Right.
Why did you pick ClickUp? I mean, there's so many different programs and software applications that could be used. Why'd you pick ClickUp?
I get asked that question less today because ClickUp's all over the place than 3 or 4 years ago. Long story short, we were shutting down a software product that we'd built, a PM software, to just go all in on consulting. End of 2017, we went through 71 different PM tools to try to figure out, we were focused on serving the marketing agency use case. And in the professional services use case, you've got your own company and the departments of your company. We got how are we growing it? How are we delivering on client services? What are our back end ops? But then you've also got clients and you've got client projects, and each one of those projects or campaigns has their own set of deliverables and tasks and whatever else. So we needed a robust hierarchy, something deeper in hierarchy than like a Trello or a really flat project management tool. We loved ClickUp's ability to take all the same underlying data and view it in, at the time, only 4 different configurations. But still, they said, hey, you've got the same underlying stuff. And if you want to see it in a list, because you're Mr. Detail or whatever, you're like OCD, like do that. But if you're a designer or creative and you want to see it on a board, view it that way. It's the same underlying data, see it however you want. And that's totally commonplace today. Every tool pretty much has that. ClickUp still has more views than most tools, but a Notion, an Airtable, whatever else does the same thing. At the time, Asana said you can pick one or the other. You can choose to view this as a list, or you can see it as a board, but you can't see the same underlying data. So for a team where you've got a project manager who wants to see things in a list and a designer who wants to only see a board view or a Kanban view, that's a big advantage that ClickUp had. The template builder, the core of why agencies make money, is because they do the same thing over and over, and there's a lot of efficiency that comes from repetition. And so having templates that are really easy to deploy and to build out and have due dates get remapped and automations around assignments, that was a big appeal. And ClickUp was able to take some of the code and logic that we'd built in our tool and improve their template builder.
Which actually did just one thing that you said right there, which is also really important, is that you have templates that you can create. But how many times do you speak with an agency that is saying we're having a tough time scaling, and then you find out that they customize their deliverable, like it's very customized,
right, every time,
from one to another to another to another to another, that makes it actually impossible to create a template. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, like doing a little bit of everything without focus.
I'm totally fine if people are in the totally custom bucket. If you're charging the premium that goes along with doing totally custom, this is one of a kind art, this is one of a kind workmanship. So you're paying a one of a kind price. There's a reason we pay a premium for that kind of stuff. And I'm totally fine on I love the other end of the spectrum. Hey, this is very productized and you pay an inexpensive price because of that. In the messy middle where agencies go to die is like, hey, we'll do totally custom work at productized prices or, without the right premium associated with that. Because all we tend to factor in is, well, what's the actual hard design or development or writing time of the project? And we totally leave out, well, what are the project management and account management and just the cost of trying to coordinate and get feedback and do revisions and whatever else in a project. So that's a really good point, that you've got to have some consistency in the inputs if you want to have consistency in the outputs.
Sure. It's funny. I was a professor of entrepreneurship last year, an adjunct professor. I was just asked to teach, and I was like, yeah, what the heck? New thing I've never done before, so give it a shot. And so one of the lessons that I gave my students after I had my students sort of start creating the first stages of their businesses, and I noticed how complex those businesses were that they were sharing. They wanted to do everything because they knew that there was some person that would buy this and some person that would buy this and some person who would buy this. All of a sudden it was like so complex because they felt like by not offering everything that they were going to shut down a certain amount of buyers. Then when you look at the wealthiest companies in the world, one of the things that you realize is that maybe they started off complex as far as customer facing is concerned. They offered everything, but then they got simpler and simpler and simpler as they got larger. So it's like you look at these companies when they've simplified, simplification is growth. And it's so much easier to run the company when you focus in on simplicity. And that means narrow down the market, narrow down your offerings, and just be the best there.
You get known for it, just works. The reason so many people love Apple is, I don't know, I don't have to overthink it. Like, it just works. If you just look at technically, which is a better phone, like the Samsung thing or this Apple or the Google Pixel, whatever number. If you run all the actual metrics, yeah, Google Pixel might be a better phone. But if you look at what's the hassle, like what's the simplicity, what's the ease for me to get value, a ton of value back out of it, it's the iPhone, obviously. And that comes from a really, really, really finely honed process because they've eliminated a ton of the variables and just said, no, this is the one way you get your phone.
I mean, just look at your company, right? Your company has had really impressive growth over the years, and your company focuses on one platform.
Yeah, one audience, one very specific part of their business, and one software platform.
And as a result, it's been relatively, would you say, easy from a scale standpoint?
Because this is not the first, just like anybody who's an entrepreneur, any guest that you have on, whatever business you're talking about is almost never the first business that they've tried. And compared to running an agency before and jumping around between a bunch of different things, we spent the first year at our agency being digital yes men. Tell me what you want done on the internet and we'll figure out how to do it, because that's how we're gonna make money. The speed, the development, or the velocity of improvement when you're doing 15 different things is just so slow compared to, you look at like just how fast we can improve and build new stuff and new tech, and the asset library builds on top of ClickUp. That we've got the largest asset library in the world of technical solutions and process templates on top of ClickUp. So if someone comes in and says, I'm a HubSpot partner agency, it's like, okay, well, we've got template libraries from working with 240 something HubSpot partners. Like, that's refined. We can plug that in on day one, but it's all because of just being hyper focused on the one problem over and over.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So let's say I'm an agency and I come knocking on your door. I say, hey, Gray, this company is just far, far dependent on me. I'm having a difficult time scaling. How do you solve that problem?
The first thing is just figure out what are the drivers. And the drivers are always some combination of the people that you have running the system, for sure. But then the three kind of pieces of that, are you appropriately staffed? Are you understaffed? What from a team perspective do you need? But from an operations perspective, I think all of this boils down to these three pillars of kind of what's the tooling that you have. That's why a ton of people come to us. I think we've got a project management problem and we need a new software, or, we're on ClickUp and it's not working. We need to either throw it away or we need to fix it. And so we might as well talk to you before we throw it away. But how do the tools talk to each other? How do we become technically excellent? The processes that you've got built for your team and that your team should be following. What's the quality of the processes that we have? And then the third big piece is the habits, the behaviors that we have. Do we execute really consistently? So if we think of that as our Venn diagram, tools, processes, and habits, you think at the very middle is like, hey, our goal is operational excellence. We're trying to create clarity for everyone in the organization. To get that operational excellence, we have to be technically excellent, procedurally excellent, behaviorally excellent. And if we remove any part of that, you got the coolest tech and the best processes, but the habits aren't there. It's like we got very inconsistent outcomes because sometimes maybe it gets followed, but sometimes it doesn't. If you get the tool and you've got the habits, but the wrong processes, we're operating really efficiently, but we're misguided. And even if we're just off by a couple of degrees, we're not going to produce the client results. And if we get the bottom two pillars and we get processes right and the habits, this is probably the best combination. And we're just inefficient at we're doing the right thing. We're doing it consistently, but we're inefficient at delivering results, which is going to hurt profitability too. When an agency comes in, we're always trying to evaluate where are they now on those three pillars and what needs the most focus. And inevitably, all three of those need some TLC. But there's something there at the beginning that's a bigger issue than the other. And if it's around habits, is it buy-in? Is it that we haven't given them clear rules of engagement? Is it there's a lack of accountability? If it's processes, why are we missing? Is it because the inputs are too inconsistent? Are they just selling whatever people want in whatever order and quantity people want it? Or do they actually have repeatable stuff and they just haven't built or haven't figured out what those processes look like? Or is it primarily hey, they've got the right workflow, they're a really talented team and they are willing to work together well, but the systems that they're running on from a technical perspective just don't make any sense right now. And then we'll build a playbook from there.
ClickUp by itself is a very impressive software, but the other side of the coin is, I felt like ClickUp 3 times a week, they're announcing hey, guess what? A new development, a new tool, a new feature, a new all this other stuff. So ClickUp, just like any tool, is brilliant. However, all a tool does, my friend Ari Meisel actually made reference to this. He said, all technology does is it can amplify bad habits. It's an amplification tool. If you're not using it correctly, if you don't even have the right process for using your processes in the beginning, all it's going to do is amplify and make your problems bigger. Would you agree with that?
100%. You and I both know plenty of 8-figure businesses, and some of them run on ClickUp, and some of them run on Monday, and some of them run on Asana, and some of them don't even have a sophisticated project manager. It's obviously not the commonality. Is what specific software are you using?
Some are still using Google Sheets.
Right. Yeah. I was talking with somebody this morning who was saying, like, well, what would you ever do if ClickUp crashed or ClickUp wasn't the best fit? I was like, I don't care. I love ClickUp. I'm rooting for them. Our standard has always been, what's the best tool for most agencies most of the time? We want to maximize our market share, but we also want to simplify the variables as much as we can, because that's going to make scale easier. So if that's not ClickUp, and the history of the project management space would say, at least 10 years from now, that's not ClickUp. That'd be very unusual if the same tool was the best tool for most agencies most of the time for a 12-year period or whatever. We'd be totally fine. Like if I had to chop away our emphasis on training or ability to consult on processes or the specialty on ClickUp, putting ClickUp on the chopping block first, because we could replicate this on another platform. And the commonality to all of those 8-figure orgs that are not operating out of chaos and they've created clarity for their team is that they're still technically, procedurally, and behaviorally excellent. It's just a different tech stack than what we're plugging in for people.
Now, one of the bigger challenges that we've seen is that a company will adopt a technology, or let me rephrase that, leadership will adopt a technology.
Right.
But getting everybody to use it becomes the bigger problem.
Yeah.
So what have you seen, and what advice would you give to our listeners who say we have a technology, but how do we get people to use it, number one, and then number two, how do we get them to use it correctly?
The first thing I would say is I think when a lot of the stuff in our marketing probably looks like sexy technical features and, oh, here's this cool thing you can build in ClickUp. And that's purely because that's what people are looking for. And there is an element in what we do of sell them what they want, give them what they need, at least market to what people's eyeballs are interested in, and then try to re-educate to behind the scenes. A lot of the work is actually pretty boring. We need to set really clear expectations for everybody on the team around what this is ultimately going to look like. We need to paint a vision of what this is going to look like. We need to give them crystal clear rules of engagement for how they're going to work in the platform moving forward. What are the standards that we have? What are the core rules of engagement that we have to be set for people? The next step, if you've set the vision and you've given really clear rules of engagement, is folks have to be adequately trained on the platform. It means really straightforward. Look, here's how you start your day. Here's how you end your day. Here's the key features. Here's the unlocks and the things that'll make you more efficient and make you enjoy this tool more. And then the most important step, maybe in the whole process after those things, is accountability.
Yes, I was hoping you were going to say that.
Yeah, you can't throw all that stuff at people and then think they're perfect on day one and you never have to look again. You hire a new head of growth, and if you just send them off to the races, like you're betting an awful lot they're going to be perfect on their first try with no course correction or anything else. And we sometimes do this for clients now. Like we're a fractional, we call it ClickUp champion. It's like the corny name for it, but it doesn't matter. Project manager, whatever you want to call it. A fractional person in their workspace. And if we're not providing that, we'll train somebody on a client's team to do it. And they're running a daily spot check in the platform. And there's habits on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. If you want people to build healthy habits, you have to have daily reinforcing checks there. It's not fair to hold people accountable when the rules are always changing or there's no clarity given to people on what you expect out of them. But once you set those expectations, it's a huge disservice if you don't hold them accountable to it.
And not only that, you have to be careful. We talked earlier in this podcast about exceptions. And people are going to defer to their old habits or what is easier for them in that moment. And they may find communication coming through email or sending a document through email like, hey, can you review this? It's ready by email. And if you allow that to happen, like we talked about earlier, now we've just set a new standard.
Yeah.
So with our company, and you may advise differently, if something like that happens, we'll do it ourselves and we'll tell our clients when something like that happens, reply back and say, please put this on Monday and I'll read it there. Right. Or please put this on ClickUp and I'll read it there, or Asana, whatever project management tool you're using. You can't grant those exceptions.
Thinking about culture is a function both of what you celebrate and of what you accept or tolerate. So celebrate and tolerate is often how I communicate to people. To make sure I'm celebrating when people are doing good work, that we're intentional in celebrating that, but also that we're not tolerating, this person didn't want to put it there and they're an exceptional designer, so I'd hate to slow them down and make them do that. Well, that's fine, but all it takes to mess up, to make any of the feedback loop that you could get out of this. So what's the kind of reporting we can pull from this? As soon as you tolerate somebody not doing it in the system, aside from the inequity in how you apply the rules that's there and the cultural impacts that has, you're also killing yourself from a reporting perspective too. So there's a whole bunch of reasons to not tolerate non-compliance.
Sure, exactly. And if I see that this behavior is accepted by this person, then, but you talk about cultural impacts and whatnot, you have to have integrity for your culture. And that integrity is, if you have a set of rules and behaviors that are expected, then you have to follow that. The moment you decide not to follow it, you are now out of integrity with your culture. And the whole point behind culture is that you get rewarded and promoted to the extent you're in alignment with culture, and you're removed to the extent you're out of alignment. So you're already, as leader of the company, out of alignment if you are out of integrity. So what does that do and the repercussions of that? So it's super important. I do want to talk to you about tracking, because we mentioned that earlier in that accountability. How are you tracking and making sure things are followed inside of, say, ClickUp? So is it just about looking at due dates, or is there something else that you use? And making sure processes are actually being followed the way that they're designed.
Yeah, so it's not just due dates, but due dates are a piece of it. In any system that you design, there will naturally be flaws. So our system, this is maybe getting a little nerdy, but I'll try to keep it simple enough that people can kind of visualize this. Our system, when working with the typical agents inside of ClickUp, there are some cases where there should be a different methodology to it, but it's largely due date driven and assignee, and often we'll use time estimates or point out some estimate around effort involved there as well. Because of that, what that lets us do is it lets us create views for people that show them walking into a day, hey, here's what's on your plate for the day, and here's roughly how many hours of estimated work you have on your plate, or that type of thing. Well, the natural way that tasks fall through the system, then the flaw in the system is, well, what if a task somehow got a due date removed or never got a due date in the first place? Or what if an assignee never got added? Or what if some effort estimate never got added to that task? If it's coming from a template, we can automate a lot of those inputs by pulling stuff from templates and using automations based on what client is for. That assigns the right, in your case, what coach is going to do the work then, or whatever the agency example is. So the check is both, certainly, what are the overdue tasks that didn't get completed, or what are the inputs that these items were completed, but nobody tracked their time, or they didn't do whatever. So we'll set specific views or dashboards to grab that stuff based on the system design. But then we're also scanning for what are the things that are slipping their way through the cracks. This never got assigned. What are the list of tasks that never got a due date that have been created in the last X period of time, or had a due date removed as a filter? We want to measure how many times are we going back and doing scope adjustments on projects, or how many rounds of revisions are needed. So basically filters based on the properties that we have set for that, and then try to create standard views. And that's all packaged up into a standard routine. Here's what first you're going to look at overdue tasks, then you're going to look at tasks without due dates, then you're going to look at tasks without assignees, then you're going to look at time tracking entries, and hey, who's over and where they should be, are there any errors? Who needs more help? How do we do resource management? Like just kind of a very prescriptive, here's what the check is going to look like based on the methodology and the system that's in place for that client, based on what's important for them.
Which for an agency is critically important, because one of the metrics that they need to track is utilization rates. And how utilized is their team? If they're underutilized after a certain percentage, they're not going to be as profitable as a company. If they're overutilized, then it signals, hey, we need to start hiring people in order to accommodate our pipeline. On the flip side of the coin too is, so we quoted, $30,000 for a project, whatever it is. Well, how much money did we actually make on this project? Did we quote it correctly? What is the future projects? Where do we have to make those adjustments? All those things. Guesswork is a cancer behind any organization, so we have to eliminate guesswork wherever possible. And even in those repetitive tasks within ClickUp, I'm sure you have templates for checklists and all this other stuff to make sure that things are done the way that they should be done and so forth, which is also important. So, Gray, one of my favorite questions I like to ask my guests, this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. what would you say is your number one biggest, best tip for our listeners right now who are saying, how do I get my company beyond 7 figures?
I think the key relationship in any professional services business is the relationship between your leader in the growth side of the business and your leader in the what we call delivery, client services, whatever name people want for that. Some people call it operations. We don't refer to it as that, but basically who's making the promise and who's keeping the promise. And there's a healthy natural tension that exists there between the two. I want to be as ambitious as I can in making the promises. And on the flip side, you got whoever's leading delivery saying, hey, you're over promising this. And I need to rely, if I'm the one making the promise, on who's keeping the promise. And are they actually going to back me up and be able to keep my promise so that I can live in integrity in the promises I'm making to people? And I think for moving to and beyond 7 figures, I think as early as possible, getting that to be 2 distinct people, somebody leading, growing the business, and somebody leading, keeping the promises and producing exceptional client results on a consistent basis. That's super important. In my case, in our business, that's Andrew, my business partner. He leads the delivery side. I lead the growth side. Probably most people aren't in that position of having a co-founder. There's plenty who are, but a lot of people that's, hey, I'm going to lead the growth side of the business and I need to create the systems and hand off the delivery side of the business to somebody else and bring in a leader to lead that side. But the commonality, the average fast growing agency, the agency who's growing at 30+% a year, which is not all that fast at the smaller stages and then becomes relatively fast at the larger stages, the majority of them have 2 distinct people in those roles. And a lot of the agencies who are growing at 10 or 15 or 20% or staying pretty steady year over year, it's a solo owner or 2 owners who are just kind of, maybe not even owners, but often that's the case, who are really in redundant roles. They're both doing a little bit of the sales and they're doing a little bit of the delivery, and it makes way more sense to divide and conquer and have that tension where they're both pushing each other. The delivery side is leaning on the sales side to set quality expectations, and the sales side is leaning on the delivery side to ramp up their capacity and game to be able to take on more clients.
You have somebody responsible for the front of the house and you have somebody responsible for the back of the house.
That's the shorter way of saying it, yeah.
I really love the way that you worded it too. You know, who's making the promise and who's keeping the promise. When you're a small business, you have direct line of sight because you're the one who's keeping the promise.
Right.
But then as the company gets bigger, you lose that line of sight. And that's when you start hearing leaders talk about they're putting out fires all the time. It's mismanaged expectations is the biggest cause of a fire. And the way that you solve those mismanaged expectations is both managing it on the front end, but on the back end too, and that comes down to the systems and processes and all that other jazz. So, Gray, people want to learn more about you, Zen Pilot. Where do we send them?
Yeah, zenpilot.com is great. Folks are welcome to email me directly, gray@zenpilot.com. But yeah, just head into the website. We've got some really good educational guides on agency operations, running ClickUp for agencies. If people Google ClickUp for agencies, they'll find some of our resources in the top slot too.
If you use ClickUp, or if you're interested in ClickUp and creating better systems and processes and scaling, Gray is the man. Zen Pilot is the company. So I do highly recommend you check them out. Just great leadership behind the company, and I'm a fan. So Gray, thank you very much for being here as a guest of the Beyond 7 Figures podcast. And thank you all for listening. If you're looking for additional tips, strategies, and information for growing and scaling your business, also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gadet with my friend Gray Mackenzie, and I will see you in another episode.